Welcome into the Backroads Bill podcast. I'm Ben, and if you're listening to this on the day of release, that means it's Christmas Day. So Merry Christmas to those that celebrate, and Happy Holidays to everybody else that celebrates this time of year, regardless of your religious affiliation. And today we brought on Ted Harrison, who is the Reverend at Trinity United Church, because yes, there is obviously spirituality to this and religious aspect to this day, but we brought him on because we wanted to talk to him about nature and his connection to nature, and also the connection between different faiths and different spirituality, and how everything kind of comes back around into nature and what it means to people of all walks of life. So we're going to dig into a bunch of that stuff, but first we're going to hear from today's title sponsor, Source for Sports North Bay.
Sports aren't just what we do, they're who we are. Source for Sports North Bay is your advocate, your local support system, and your biggest fan. 1321 Fisher Street has grown from a place where knowledgeable experts can help you find exactly the gear you need, to the hotbed of team uniforms, apparel and fanwear, to a community stronghold for all the things that truly matter to you and your family's sports journey. We love helping you find your first pair of skates, as much as we relish supporting local leagues, teams, and athletes. Wherever your sports journey takes you, make sure you visit Source for Sports North Bay at 1321 Fisher Street so we can help you along your way.
Well, Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. I know I said it in the intro, but again, hope that everyone is taking time this season, spending time with friends, families, and thank you for spending a little bit of that time with us today on the Backroads Bill podcast. As I mentioned before, we have Ted Harrison joining us in studio. Ted, why don't we just start by introducing yourself to us?
Yeah, my name's Reverend Ted Harrison. I serve Trinity United Church, right down McIntyre. And I've got to say that on Christmas morning in the United Church, we do not have services. We are amongst the many people who say, stay in your pajamas all day and maybe put just a little bit of Bailey's in your coffee.
Well, growing up, my family went to First Baptist, and so just right off Castles, and I think they had, I think it was like a Christmas Eve ceremony, something like, or not ceremony, sorry, sermon, because I don't ever remember going to church on Christmas Day. It's interesting.
Different cultures.
Is that like a Catholic thing where a lot of times they would go for like a mass?
I married an Anglican, and the Anglicans too. Like when you got up on Sunday morning, I don't know how this worked. Maybe you did your stockings, and then you packed off to church. So you had to look good. Then you came back and maybe you did the rest of the presents. It's
a gift today to have you in the studio on this Backroads Bill podcast because we're going to talk about spirituality with nature and on the Backroads. It's something I've wanted to talk to you about, and for the viewers and listeners, I think in our community, there's no better person I can think of, because you have strong connections to nature because you go outside and reap the benefits. And again, we want to kind of bring that all together and talk a bit about this because for me personally, it's been really important in my healing that I've gone through in the last couple of years. But my whole life, it has directed me, and I kind of always say to people, this is my cathedral, and I've always tried to make sense of it all. And so Ted, in our conversation today, we'll go back and forth, and there'll be lots of, I think, nuggets of information and thoughts that I think, especially on this day, whether you're listening to it on this day or some other time, that people will take away and say, yeah, I think that's something to think about. So again, glad to be in the studio. And I wanted to start out with, a long time ago in a faraway land, when I actually talked to one of your parishioners who told me about, you go on special canoe trips in the fall, in particular, I think it is, and a group of people come together. And I wanted to talk a little bit, how did that start and why do you do it?
Okay, this is going to go. So the trip that you're talking about is our Trinity men's canoe trip. We call it the Trinity Testosterone, and it's shrouded in secrecy. but my experience goes back actually quite a bit more. I was already in the ministry. I was ordained in the early 2000s. A dear friend of mine and colleague went through a disastrous divorce, and he was wrecked. And I was beside myself. What am I going to do with him? And I realized, you know what? He's never been out in the wilderness, but this is what we have to offer. And I think it was really honestly based in sort of an intuition that I've experienced in my own life, that nature is a healing environment. And so I'm not going to mention any names, but I took somebody who had never been in a canoe before, and the first season, and I say the first season because of course that intimates that there were more. We went out, and I had to do all the work because he'd never cooked on a fire or on a stove. He'd never set up a tent. He'd never stood in a canoe. And we were in Killarney, which I know is one of the parks that you love, absolutely world-class park. And I remember him at one point sort of standing in that stinky black mud that's characteristic of some of the portages in Killarney. And he was saying to me, "Ted, you don't know how out of my comfort zone I am right now." But let me tell you, we spent all that time. We spent a great deal of energy. We kind of crisscrossed, because I didn't really have a very structured plan at the time. Kind of crisscrossed Killarney, and just sort of discovered the place. Worked hard, talked deeply in a heartfelt way. And my sense at the end of that, and I don't take credit for it, is that he began his healing journey.
Yeah, and when I think back, rabbis, priests, and ministers were the original therapists in essence, and you take people outside. And what do you think the outside did for that person or other people that you've had that opportunity? Because for the most part, in your job, your occupation, you have the church, you have a building, and of course congregations. I mean, it was just a matter of on Sundays in particular that people would flock, so to speak, to go to the building because it was a special place. But that particular moment, and maybe it was one of the first examples, how did you find all of a sudden, oh, I have a new medium here, the outdoors? Well,
the church has always had an aesthetic to it, right? And in different eras and different cultures, it can be about beauty, it can be about purity, but we already have that, right? We already have that in a sense, and so maybe it's what we've intuited in nature. We say, well, we want to bring that into these buildings that sort of always point upwards, right? These spires that point up and sort of bring us to more profound places. I don't know if that answers your question, but we have that at our fingertips. And here in North Bay, we've got it right in our backyard, right, Bill? Hey, I don't need to tell you.
Exactly. There's so many places to go. And so maybe tell us a little bit more about then how the canoe trip with others evolved out of that, because that's kind of a nice segue of something that with the person that was going through a horrific situation in their life, and there was some sorting out, and probably came back with feeling better about themselves with regard to the next steps they would take into their lives, albeit it was a divorce. But tell us how then in this fellowship you have when you go out on the canoe trips.
So there is a way in which, I mean, you want to be well prepared for a canoe trip, because there are some basics that you need, and without those basics, you really can be in trouble, right? So it's the Cub Scout in us all. Be prepared. But with that acknowledged, the life out in the backwoods is simplicity itself, right? It's kind of life stripped down to the studs. Are you warm? Are you hungry? Are you working too hard? Are you getting cold? All those little things. And so I think it kind of takes away the distractions. That's there was a time when I would sometimes bring a radio on a canoe trip, because if I'm going out for long enough, I'd want to hear the CBC News in the morning and just sort of say, okay, I want some sense of what's going on in the world. But there's a beauty in not exactly knowing everything that's going on in the world, and what's happening with your pets and your neighbors, that sort of thing, that you want to bring it down to the essence of life. And then the other thing, and Bill, you probably know this better than I do, but when it comes to those group trips, like the group trips that we do with men in the church, one of the great things is bringing a certain level of challenge, you know? If it's really easy, if you're just paddling a really short way and then you're just sort of unpacking, you're missing something, because what we need is a portage. What we need is someone needing to find their shoe in the mud, you know, or needing to reach out and help one another, saying, "Hey, you look like you're having a little trouble there. How about we try this?" And advising one another, and then people not only pull together, but they laugh together. Consistently, our response to challenge is a sense of humor. A sense of humor keeps us alive, right? And so there's a great deal of laughter, and usually laughter at ourselves. You know, it's not a cruel kind of laughter. It is a laughter that says we share this absurd human condition.
Well, we know laughter is the best medicine, but what do you think is that, again, and metaphorically speaking, I guess some of these challenges are kind of relate back to your life, but why do people want to go on these? Why do they? Because in this case, it's a men's trip. Why do they want to go on that?
You know what? Often, so it's not in those laughter-filled moments of action and work. There's always time that's kind of built in where you stop and you sit down and you look out at water, and people will say something like, I don't do this enough, or I love this, or look how beautiful this is. You know, these turtles that look like they're coming out of the pre-dinosaur era come out and take a little bit of interest in people, and they are astounded by the simple beauty. And one of the things that I've got to tell you, Bill, is that these guys. Part of the intent is we're going to give you a map. We're going to show you what's in your backyard. We're going to show you, we're going to show you some of these tent sites that we typically find are available, and and they're good. They're good for you to come with your family, come with some friends. I'd say we're verging on 80-90% of the time. I say, when's the last time you were out here? You love this. Your beauty. You don't do this enough. When's the last time? Well, it was Ted. It was last year. Last year with you guys, you know, that we see the value, we feel we feel rewarded, and then we don't do it until the opportunity is basically placed in our laps. You know,
Ben,
do you always go to the same place?
No. Temagami, the Temagami area is a real favorite. Kukagami, that Bill knows really well, is there. One thing that I'll say about Temagami, both of you guys probably know this really well, is that Temagami can be as terrifying as it is beautiful. And so if you're there on the wrong days, like we all have a picture of nature, and probably that picture is either one of those. It's either that it's beautiful and it's gorgeous and it's just there to give you this warm embrace, or it's that I was out one time and and there was lightning and it scared the heck out of me and I'm never doing that again. Well, It embraces all of that, and as does life, right, Bill? Like, this is, if we want to see this as a metaphor for life, yeah, you're going to have some beautiful days, and you're going to have some terrifying days, beauty and terror.
Yeah, those are kind of two extremes, and you brought along some poetry that you might always. Maybe this is a time just to recite this one, because I think it'll add to our conversation, and as we dive into this, what nature provides for us within our own lives and how we direct ourselves as well. So
okay, well, there's I've got a couple things here, but this is the one poetry piece that I think is just speaks of that capacity of nature to bring us to a place of greater simplicity. And this is by Wendell Berry. So Wendell Berry is a great American poet. He's still alive. He's kind of an agrarian. He has a very simple farm in Kentucky, and he sort of argues that that life needs to be more simple. We need to be local. We need to be connected to the ground. And he's a Baptist. He's a Baptist man.
There you go.
So this poem is called "The Peace of Wild Things," and Wendell Berry has this sort of low Southern gentleman's voice. I'm going to give a little taste of that.
We'll have to grade you on your impersonation.
Well, I hope you don't know Wendell Berry then. It might not be that good.
But
Here it goes. It's called "The Peace of Wild Things." When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be. I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world and am free. That's Wendell Berry.
That sounds like, when they have them on TV, when you see when they do the sermons on TV, that's kind of what it sounded like. A little bit more subdued, but that's just immediately what it brought it to me.
Well, he's talking about being well-grounded and what I think nature does for him during whatever times of life and where he actually goes and lies down. It reminds me, too, of what one of my mentors, Gord Restool from Dokis First Nation, taught me a long time ago. Gord is long past, but he would say to me, and he knew that about my lifestyle, he knew that he could constantly tell me to slow down, but he would tell me in natural ways. And one way would be like this. Gord would say, Bill, you need to go down to the river and stay a while. He didn't say go down to the river and sit or go for a bit. He said, Bill, you go down to the river and stay a while.
Oh, there's something about water, eh?
And then he would say, it will take the river will take all your worries away. And when I do that to this day, it's true. Whether it's the sound or the visual picture that I have, whether my eyes are open or closed, and when I spend that solitude or I spend that time, and time is of the essence, so to speak, because you have to spend the time. But at the end of that, I do feel better. I do, and I think. I'm actually looking over at your T-shirt now.
Yes.
And I know the cameras in the studio will pick that up, but tell us about what that means, because I think that's another part about how we, whether it's canoeing or walking or sitting, of how we take in that part of nature. And also about Wendell, what he's saying there too. I think we have to... You can't hear the traffic in the background. You don't want to hear the traffic in the background, and you don't want to hear other things that take away from those moments that are purely your own, perhaps. You could be sharing these spots with others, but they're in special places. And so maybe let's just go right into the T-shirt.
Well, first of all, the Wendell Berry, the Peace of Wild Things, that's talking about a certain kind of stillness, isn't it? That it's... and the phrase that comes to mind, I know there's a Japanese word for it, but it translates as forest bathing.
Yes.
And there's been this whole science of trying to figure out what it is. They're these, they're actually like particles that they can measure that, come out of that your body takes in when you're in these spaces. And so he talks about being in the presence of still water, the idea of just what your mentor speaks of, go to a body of water, that somehow there's this stillness that, and for him, it sounds like it's really anxiety, right? He's got this fear for himself, for his children, and then he comes into the presence of still water, a little reminiscent of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd; He leads me beside the still waters. And I love the phrase, he comes into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. It's this anxiety. I need to get away with living in the future and come into the present. So this T-shirt has a Latin phrase on it. So yeah, I don't even know where your cameras are here.
It's we can see it. You're good.
So it says "Solvitur ambulando," and "Solvitur ambulando." This is a phrase that was come up with by the church father Saint Augustine, 4th century, I guess, and he lived into the 5th century probably. Solvitur ambulando, and it was originally meant. It's a refutation of the mathematical concept of Zeno's paradox, which we're really not here to talk about. It was adopted very quickly during his lifetime because it means it is solved by walking. solvitur ambulando. It is solved by walking. And this phrase has been adopted by walkers and hikers and adventurers out of that original context and into it is this idea that things are solved by walking. I mean, if you Google this phrase, you're gonna get lots of hits, Bill. My friend, after we did the Camino de Santiago in Spain, gave me this shirt, and this was because it was sort of a phrase that we were using as we were walking. There was this sense that you undertake a pilgrimage, and in the old sort of medieval sense of doing a pilgrimage, they had this wonderful word. You do a pilgrimage and you are searching for a boon. There will be a boon at the end, that there's something that you get out of this. I don't think the Camino de Santiago has ever been more popular than it is right now. And it is not necessarily by religious pilgrims. This is not dedicated Roman Catholics, certainly. It is people who realize often in midlife that they have that they're kind of approaching one of those a fork in the road, or they've unfortunately kind of fallen backwards into a change, a retirement, losing a job, losing a loved one, the breakup of a relationship. And these people they're looking for that boon, right? And they're not going to use that word, and they're probably not going to call it a pilgrimage either. But they go for this long walk, and their lives are changed.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that phrase, it's the journey. It's not what's at the end, it's the journey. And as whether we're within ourselves or with other people in conversation, self-reflection or otherwise, then we start to maybe sort things out. But we're still outside. And I mean, this is not something, people do go for walks around our arena in the morning and in the mall and places like that. But being in nature is, I think, different. There's it's the air, the trees, the sounds and things like that I think adds to the walking.
There may be something more to a sense of being present when you're not doing the same route, the same circuit over and over again. That might start to feel a little like its own rat race, right? That you're kind of going out and you come to a fork in the road and you say, oh, yesterday I went right. Today, I kind of forget what's on the left. Let's go that way, or maybe I'll take the road less taken.
Yeah. So back to the canoe trips, without divulging any secrets and things like that, is that, and you've done this many, many years now, what is the feedback from the participants when they do this? So that's what I'm really interested in. So I'm always interested in talking to people about what do they get out of the great outdoors or nature or the backroads? What does it do for them? I often say to people, the best photographs on any of the apps mostly are with people outside. They're not. I think there's a preponderance of things that happen outside, whether they're goofy or not. It doesn't matter; they're still outside. But I'm more interested in what the participants say about these kinds of things. And I don't know exactly what you do, and maybe you'll tell us some of the things that maybe there are conversations, whether they're in small groups or by themselves, and maybe people only get something out of it on their own, and they come back and say, Ted, this is the best thing I've ever done in my life, and I need to do more of this or whatever, or I came to a realization about something. But what is the kind of feedback that you get from these things? So
I appreciate that you kind of you tacitly acknowledge there that we do have a kind of a code of silence over the trip, and we have this we do this kind of joking vow that what happens in the bush stays in the bush. And you know what? I think we do catch a little flack about that from people who don't come on the trip, and the fact that it's limited to people who are male or identify as male. Sometimes they're like, yeah, you go and you do whatever you want, and then you say you're not even allowed to tell us what it's about. So I take some flack for that. There's lots of jokes about it. But the truth is, and the truth that I don't talk about very much, is when you create this sense of a protected container that what's encouraging is this sense of acceptance, of mutual acceptance. We're all here for one another. And if we have a couple of people who we are very blessed to have a couple of people who say, we're gonna plan some meals, and we're gonna eat really, really well, but we're gonna need some help. And it's like, boy, if those guys need some help, if they want you to chop some carrots, you get up and chop some carrots. If they want you to wash up, you wash up. We have some people who are very careful about considering the impact, the load that having, say, 20 guys on a sizable campsite can have, including on the Thunderbox, the facilities. Mm-hmm. Should I just leave it at that? Mm-hmm. And so there's this sense of, okay, we need people not only to chop wood, which people always want to do that. People always want to go find some dead wood and chop it up. But also we've put in some improvements where we're like, okay, we're going to put in this table. We're going to leave the campsite better than we found it. We've put in another Thunderbox when it's like, okay, we've got too many people, and considering the environment here, we need to do a little better. This idea, we are going to help one another. We're going to be there for one another. And what is said in this space is going to be protected, means that people feel accepted and share at a level that, I guess no longer surprises me. No, you know what? Sometimes it still does. Sometimes people will share a story and you just think, wow, the guts that it takes and the trust that we must have built for someone to share something so foundational in their lives can be really profound.
It reminds me of about 16 years that retired Sergeant George Cucci from the OPP had all the what was then called Native awareness, but for Native and non-Native OPP officers, that they would come to the Canadian Ecology Center for a week to learn about a primer and Indigenous culture back in the day before Truth and Reconciliation. And it was a whole process of leading up to the Sweat Lodge. And it was the same protective environment that I've experienced myself, that you go into the Sweat Lodge and for whatever reasons leading up to that deep things that, and of course, police officers will say carry a lot of baggage because they see a lot of things, horrific things. So, it was an amazing, and I just know for one of mine, the breakthrough that I had. And it came out of that protected environment that I had to finally talk about what was really, really a gut-wrenching thing in my life. But I did talk about it, and of course, that that stays in the Sweat Lodge, and that it is good that finally you talk about things that you need to talk about. So, again, I started off by saying about therapy and things, and so sometimes from a ministerial perspective, you've created this and probably seen the benefits of continuing to do this. And probably for the participants that probably come back time and time again, they come back for all kinds of different reasons to share and to experience. And so I think it's a neat thing. So when I first heard about it, I thought, what is Ted's told me about this, and I'm thinking about this. And I've always thought about it. So I'm glad you're here in the studio today talking about this, because I think there's all kinds of things that, you touched on forest bathing. We're going to have a guest coming up in the new year on forest bathing.
Ooh,
and
I'll tune in.
Yes, you'll tune in. And of course, forest bathing is a form of walking, albeit you don't walk very far, you don't walk very fast. And talking to forest bathing guides, and I've been on them, that sure, it's a different way. And the other thing I like about, I'm kind of all over the map here, and I've left the Sweat Lodge, but gone to the walking. For me too, I can't sit still. That's just on my. So the walking is important to me, to be moving, and I call it moving meditation in a sense, because I can sit down by the river for a while, but I most often have to keep moving. But I do like those breaks when I stop and gather all my thoughts. And I'll say, yeah, this is me time, but also in your me time, you can share your me time with others. And so this is what the canoe trip also, I think, you're sharing a lot of me time. And there are probably times when there's a lot of brave people who all of a sudden will talk about things that they've probably wanted to talk about for a long time.
Well, just to piggyback off that too, like when we talk, there's this whole stigma about mental health, like men's mental health, I should say specifically,
Yes.
right? I remember one of the initiatives that we really helped with was Bring It to the Surface. We went out to Kananaskis and did a bunch of podcasts on that. And the whole idea of that campaign is for mining and getting people to talk about their mental health, because mining is a very macho-esque job and career. So
like policing, like Bill was talking about there. Yeah.
But what's interesting about having that fellowship is like it transcends the religious aspects of going out to do it, which is obviously something that churches will do, like the getaways to help your relationship with your faith and all that stuff. But it transcends that into also just in general allowing people a safe space, right? To just talk about whatever's going on in their life or their troubles, and you know that you're not going to be judged. You know that it's not going anywhere, right? You're not going to hear it from it's not going to be gossip, right?
Yeah, and like you're talking about, Ben, when we're on these trips, every time we go out, we sort of establish some kind of a theme, and it's usually, it's not sports, it's not weather, it's the deep personal stuff, and people share according to they share from their lives according to the level of trust that we've built, and I guess the level of risk that people are capable of taking, and it has results.
Yeah, and that's kind of the one thing when we talk about. There's like the whole thing in Catholicism with confession, right, and being able to confide in your I guess it would be the priest, right? Who's am I getting that right?
Scripturally speaking, and we're doing that in this setting. We are able to confess to one another. People of faith,
it's a bit of a different. It's a different vibe, right? And it's a different.
It's less institutionalized and more democratized, perhaps.
Yeah, and that's one thing that's interesting. One of the interesting parallels between Christianity and Catholicism is just. It feels like Catholicism is very rigid and very, as you said, it's very organized, and it's like you do these things, you do confession, whereas I felt like Christianity was always more of a laid-back approach, if that kind of makes sense. And maybe it's a little bit different because there's so many different sects of...
and what you're differentiating is Protestantism and Catholicism, because they're both very, very Christian, and one comes out of the other. When I was on this Camino, one of the things that it's Catholic and it's European and it's in many ways very different. It won me over in so many ways and kind of changed me through beauty. So I'm from a Protestant tradition that's very kind of heady. We're very intellectual. It's all about what we're very influenced by the Enlightenment and rationality. And you go into these environments where it's all about beauty. And I'm remembering this one church where they had a great setup of Mother Mary, and they changed her clothes. So she was larger than life. So these clothes are very, very big, and they're changing her like this. Some part of me says, like, what? Mary, this is Virgin Mary, and you're treating her like some kind of big Barbie doll. But it just overwhelmed me with its beauty. Like it was just the beauty and the care that. That there's this funny relationship between truth and beauty that at some times can overwhelm us, and that's what we experience, of course, in nature, Bill. That every so often you are gobsmacked, and it is it's more than rational. It's because beauty is not the sort of thing that you say, how does this make sense? You just say, wow.
Well, we'll be back with Ted and more conversation around the nature and spirituality in a moment. But first, I'd like to remind you, if you enjoyed our podcast, please consider giving us a like, a comment, a follow, subscribe. It helps us continue to grow our podcast, and it helps us continue to do shows like the one that we are doing today, and to help attract our great sponsors, including one of today's sponsors, which is Twig's Coffee Roasters. Twig's an absolutely amazing place to go if you're on your way to the out of town onto the back roads here in North Bay, but not just in North Bay. They also have places in Sturgeon Falls, in Sudbury. Heck, if you're even going down Highway 17, you can make multiple stops they have 5 different locations which is absolutely fantastic. We use twigs all the time. And it doesn't really matter what you're into. If it's baked goods, if it's food, hot drinks, everything there is top class. The staff there is fantastic, and again, and it doesn't even matter which location you go to. All of them, the team that works there is absolutely phenomenal. One of the cool things in the office that we do is we have scone bets, and their scones are absolutely fantastic. So if you lose a bet, you have to go out and buy scones for the whole office, and everybody kind of wins on those ones. It's always nice when you hear somebody make a scone bet, because that usually means that the entire office is going to win, which is awesome. So it's a nice way that we all get rewarded. So whether you're looking for coffee, hot drinks, baked goods, again, food, anything, check out Twigs Coffee Roasters. Of course, you can order online for pickup at twigs.ca. It's time to Toyota at North Bay Toyota. Attention truck lovers, have you been Tundra struck? The powerful and dependable Toyota Tundra is the new definition of grit. Ask us about amazing lease deals on a 2025 Tundra Double Cab SR 4-wheel drive and experience ingenious levels of capability, technology, and refinement. Or maybe you're an SUV lover? Take advantage of a limited shipment of 2025 RAV4s and discover the perfect blend of style, comfort, and efficiency in a compact SUV that ignites your desire to explore. Right now, get excellent lease deals on the Toyota RAV4 LE all-wheel drive and more. It's time to Toyota at North Bay Toyota, 640 McEwen, or online at northbaytoyota.com for details. There's so many parallels too between religion and nature, right? So like baptism itself, where it's like you're going into water. It's an allegory for being cleansed and all that. But even that, when we were talking about the still waters, sitting by the water, it's like there's so many connections there. I remember growing up, like my family went to Camp Norland. I don't know if
yes, I know Camp Norland.
Like my sister was a counselor, I guess. She was a counselor there. My family was very good friends with a lot of the people that ran, like the Ellsworths and those that helped run the camp itself. And it was the same kind of thing where it's like a retreat, but it's for kids. So there was like kids and teenagers but it was the same kind of idea. It was like a mixture of both. So it's the parallels again between what happens in a church and this isn't just like Protestant or Christianity. This is across like pretty much almost every religion. Is like there's an interesting connection there. And then there's also like a spiritual connection, like Bill, like what you're saying, where it's like you don't need to be part of a specific faith to understand that connection that people have. And in Indigenous teachings, it's the same thing. There's such a spirituality and connection. So it's interesting how nature is transcends a lot of the things that can divide us, and it kind of brings us together.
Yeah. Yeah, isn't that true? And actually mixing it up with people who have different reference points, different traditions, I think makes us all richer. Mm-hmm. You're making your world smaller if it's just about you and people who think like you and have the same story as you, because this world is so big and beautiful, and there are different lenses that we can look at it with.
I want to ask you too about going back to that confessing with others to others. Have you found, and again, you may not have had a previous kind of medium, the canoe trip, but as a leader of the church, as a minister, did you find that nature provided it, I don't want to say easier, but is it for people to talk? And that's what that's another thing that's really in my mind all my life is, that I don't feel comfortable in the building. I feel comfortable outside. And do you find there's a certain level of, and again, whether there's 15 or 20 men or people, well, what is it is it nature though is it a magic elixir, or is it a kind of a lead in? Is there something there that, often I tell people, I'm going outside. No, I say to people, I'm going inside. And then I have to, we're outside right now. And so when we step out the door, we're going inside to be with nature. So yeah, so that's the question: is nature provide that kind of?
So there's a bit of a paradox in this, Bill, because I'm thinking to myself that Well, my first metaphor that comes to mind is bandwidth. That we have only so much bandwidth, and we live in a culture that demands so much of that bandwidth and commodifies it, and monetizes it, right? And so when we go out, there is that simplicity that things get a little smaller. This is such a visual medium. Here I am talking to you on a podcast. I'm doing this with my hands. But at the same time, you go out into nature. So on our last trip, we had a new Canadian, and so this was just providence that in less than a week before we were leaving, we had a dropout, which always happens. People, life is busy, and some men are not as good planners as they could be, and sometimes they're double parked.
It's a very delicate way of saying it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's my go-to for when something goes wrong. Is that I'm a man.
Well, we had a new Canadian who said, I'd love to come on that trip with you, and I was saying, yeah, you should come next year, and he's like, no, I want to come this year, and I realized, we just did have a dropout, so it's way easier to have even numbers. Like I don't need to tell you, yep. No one wants to be the person in the middle of a canoe.
No, 2 per canoe,
unless it's one of those giant war canoes or something. Yeah. So this new Canadian guy was saying, I'm saying to him, so have you ever been in a canoe before? He's like, no. Like, do you have the money? It's modest, but it's typically $50 or maybe a little bit more now to go. And he's like, no, I don't have the money. I'm like, do you know how to swim? No. Do you have a sleeping bag? No. Okay, we're going to take care of you. We're going to figure this out. and he came with us, and so this is about the bandwidth thing, because I made him my partner because I'm a strong paddler, and we didn't know what we were dealing with, and I didn't if he was really uncomfortable, I didn't want to inflict him on anyone else, and so I'm paddling with him, and I'm beholding the wonder that he's got. And so we're out. This was actually a Kukigami. We went towards Wolf Lake, the left direction, the westerly direction, and he's just looking at the vastness of everything. Everything's blue, and we're in the middle of a very sizable body of water, and the clouds, birds, everything. And he the best he could come up with, he said, "It's like 4K." He's saying it's like a high definition television.
It's like the most millennial answer, or like whatever the next generation Gen Alpha answer. Was he younger too?
He'd be in his mid-late 20s, I think. And we all had a good laugh at this. It's like 4K. No. 4K tries to be like this. Yeah. That this is how big it is. That this is how much input there is. And so you see, Bill, where I'm saying, maybe it makes life more simple, but for some of us, it makes life so much more vast and so much more marvelous. Wonder filled. Like it's just
allows us to maybe talk about things that are important to us, whether it's things that are bothering us or things that we want to appreciate and don't. I don't know what it is. It's always something there. I often, at Saint-Midi Champlain Provincial Park, I often like to talk to new Canadians, in particular when they've been in the canoe for the first time. I try to guide the conversation. I see them sitting in the canoe backwards or doing this, or it's not about. And when I ask them about the canoe experience, I want to get right to how they felt about what did they feel about being in nature, not about the canoe experience, because that's very pragmatic, I suppose, and you have to learn. There's so much to learn how to make the canoe go. But how did you feel after being out there? And I often, because it helps me to fundamentally. This conversation about being simplicity. Maybe in my life, I've just tried to make nature too complex. But when I'm out there, I'm living in the simplicity, and maybe that's what is good for me, and it's been good for my healing journey and for all kinds of other things. And that's where I feel best in trying to sort out things or just feel the happiest time in my life. whether it's the release of endorphins because you're sharing camaraderie, or it's just that nature makes you smile. And so these are some of the things I take away that I've always thought that's hard to explain sometimes to people, but I always want to know, why do you go outside? I often ask that question. And so in my most upcoming article, that's why I'm asking him, what do you get out of being on the back roads? And some people go right to where they want to go, as in a place. And you mentioned, because where North Bay, as we start out saying, North Bay is centered in the mecca of canoeing, Ben. Like, we can go in all directions. So we have Algonquin Park to the south, and kind of to the north, we've got Temagami. We've got the Mattawa River and the Ottawa Rivers, and then to the west, we've got Killarney and all kinds of places.
I know, I canoe raced it. It's fine. Yeah, we got to
Lake
the end
Superior.
of Trail Lake, but you can
in North Bay, it's you can go in any direction and be on water and be on a canoe trip in short order. So anyway, it's about that whole aspect. And again, we're in our winter season now. It doesn't matter that nature is there in all four seasons and presents all kinds of different moods and visualizations and things. And I often tell people, one of the best things you can do is go back to the same place in all four seasons. The Eau Claire Gorge near us is a perfect example.
Oh, yes.
How do you feel and what do you get out of that experience? So anyway, I got off topic.
Let me give a little PS to that story about our new Canadian. I'm not saying names just because the code of silence is obviously really bred into me. After that experience, before we were done the weekend, a number of guys around the fire, of course we gather around the fire regularly for meals and for chats and that sort of thing, and they were saying, we've got to do more of this. Our experience here with this one individual, and so we sort of said, okay, well we're going to have to build this in. We're going to. It's been $50 each for a long time, that basically just covering food and gas, and we're saying, we're just going to make it. Maybe we're going to make it $60. It's probably about time. And what we want to do is cover up to a couple possible, and we're calling them Trinity Testosterone scholarships. and I think the scholarship, we were laughing about it because scholarship. No. We got to take that seriously. It is a scholarship because this is learning, and we saw the learning and we delighted in it, right? So all these different guys giving. If there's 4 guys giving him advice on how to paddle a canoe, there was 5 different ways they were recommending to do it, but that they wanted to be there. And we went swimming at the Paradise Lagoon, of course, the Paradise Lagoon, and he didn't know how to swim, so we're going to have you in a life jacket, and assured him that the life jacket would keep him afloat. Because he's never been in an environment like this, and the courage it takes to say, with a bunch of people that I don't know. And whose names I may not even remember by the end of this weekend, although he did pretty well. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to do some things that really challenge my comfort zone.
Yeah, and it's interesting going back a little bit to the still water that we've been talking about. I think there's the thing about canoe trips, because they're pretty common. There's something different about being in nature and being on the water, on the open water, versus being in the forest, or because the thing is there's an uncomfortability of being in the forest, because you have maybe there's flies or bugs or whatever around. Yeah, but when you're on, I have never felt, outside of maybe being tired because you're paddling, whenever you're on open water, there's more of a serenity to it, and I think that's where you can, because you see the vistas and everything. I think that's where you can appreciate stuff more, right? So I think there's something, I don't know what it is about water, but there's something there that's very calming and very, I think it lets you appreciate what nature can do and the connection and stuff, right?
Although that Temagami area, again, when it's beautiful, and when it's scary, it's scary. It can be terrifying. So, if you got swells and 6-foot swells in Shinglewood Bay or something like that, suddenly the water's is not
it might not
calming.
Be so serene.
The canoe guru Hap Wilson has been on one of the Backroads Bill podcasts, and I just connected with Hap the other day about this next forthcoming story about the Backroads, and of course he gave his example of somewhere in the Temagami wilderness, and I wonder too sometimes about this. I don't want to try to measure spirituality, but and Ben, you kind of touched on it. Often with my students, college or university, or any students, how they feel when they've been outside for a prolonged sense of time. We do the summer credits at the Canadian Ecology Centre where they're immersed in a high school environment for 2 weeks, but they're outside every single day from morning till night, having all their meals outside. And I also like to talk to people who have been on silent retreats. Now, the silent retreats can be in and outside, but often whether it's a 3 or 4 day or 2 weeks elongated retreats, and they say, "Oh, this was a profound experience," and I poke them a little bit to find out. I often find that when we go outside with nature or things that are maybe out of our comfort zone or unique, that I want to know about the lasting impacts of their whatever they experience. And sometimes do we fall back into the regime of the Wi-Fi and our busy lives and things like that? So that's another thing. There's no answer to that, but I mean, what does it do for you, Ted? I mean, I want to bring it back to you because you're the facilitator for these canoe trips, but in your own journey, and you are an outdoors person, how important it is to you.
I do have a part response for you, at least in that that snapping back into your day-to-day life. I was on a spiritual retreat. So this was not an outdoor retreat; it was a spiritual retreat. It was in BC, and it was must have been at least a week, if not a couple weeks long. And I have had a great spiritual mentor there, Reverend Don Grayston, Anglican priest, who's no longer with us. And I remember saying to him, I'm sort of debriefing with him. We were having a lot of silence, and I was meeting with him regularly, and I made reference to this is well and fine, Don. I love this, and the extended silence. There's a difference between a short time that can be there can be a sort of a franticness even when you're doing spiritual things. When you have an extended time, you get into more natural rhythms. You get into a greater sense of self-awareness. And I was saying to him, "This is wonderful, but I got to go out to the real world out there, the real world." And Don says to me, Don was this white-haired sage. He had a bit of a belly that kind of kept you guessing about whether or not he was wearing a belt. And he was always very slow about sort of responding. And he said, "What makes you think that's the real world, Ted? This is the real world." Mm. It's a simple thing to say, but it's not an easy thing to integrate. Yes, the real world is not the consistent distractions. The real world is the one that we don't give enough time to, that we say, "Yeah, when's the last time I did this?" "Well, it was last year when you gave us the opportunity last year." So it goes
right back to my thinking about being inside, outside, and when I call the great outdoors inside. So yeah, we don't do that enough. But in my lifetime, I've tried to spend as much time outside. And again, I think in one of the most recent podcasts, we were talking about my healing journey when I was in the hospital for a long, long time. And my daughter and Laura took me out for the very first time. And I didn't want to go out. I was so depressed and on severe meds. But they took me outside. I remember, though, when they wheeled me outside, that I knew there was a purpose to go on and that everything would be all right. And I remember the second time they wheeled me around, and I thought, this is where I need to be. And I appreciate that.
And then we started this podcast.
Yeah.
I was actually right around that time too.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I heard a profound reflection recently from Atul Gawande. He's no, it wasn't Atul Gawande. Oh, it was the Surgeon General of Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General of the U.S., and he was saying, what COVID did to us is it sped up what was already happening. We have this survival response, and we are good at survival. It's this natural thing where if you are hurting, if you put your hand on a hot stove, you withdraw. We are good at withdrawing, and we did it even more in COVID. If you need to protect yourself, if you feel assaulted, if you feel anxious, if you feel like the world is too much for you, withdraw. And so withdrawing is our number one survival response. Well, what happens when withdrawing becomes the source of the sickness? So you went through that in one way there, Bill, when you you were away, you were not outdoors anymore, and you're saying, I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay where I was, because there's a certain level in our brain, and maybe it's a very animal level that says, stay away. The world out there is dangerous, and that can make us sick too. And so to have the awareness to say, when we do go out, whether it be accidentally or on purpose, and saying, oh, this is what I need. Here's what is going to keep me alive. The further thing that I'd say to that, I'm glad that you're having these kind of conversations, and sometimes you just sort of think, well, why am I doing this? We need to point the world, because it is not necessarily always our instinct to get out there, to be with people, to be in nature. It is not always our instinct. So we need to tell people why. We need to give them rationale for this. There's an author, Joanna Macy. She's a deep ecologist. She's also a Buddhist.
What's a deep ecologist?
A deep ecologist. So she's talking about not just ecology in the immediate scientific measurable sense, but in a more philosophical sort of across the ages sense. And she says what we need to do is we need to show people that they love nature, help them discover that they do love nature and why they love nature, because that's the only way they will protect it. Otherwise, it is just a commodity and a resource to be exploited. And if we do not love nature, we won't have it. It won't. It will always be secondary.
It's interesting you say that, because of very poignant. But I think it's because when you think about the people who make decisions, right, whether it's this country or any country, right, generally where do they live? They live in the big metropolis places. And there's a disconnection. Like, even when you look at the people in Toronto, let's say, just because it's in our backyard, you look at Toronto and you see the people who live there. And I remember one time I was down there and I was in a cab, and the guy's like, he's asking me about like moose, because he's never seen a moose before. Or these people who, they go to Muskoka and they go, this is amazing. And you're like, that's normal. Like, it's not a big thing. Like, there's nothing special about the Muskoka outside of the high prices to actually like live there. So it's interesting that you say that, because there is a huge disconnect, I think, between those decision makers and where they live versus, I think, other, where a lot of other people are able to experience it all the time.
Maybe I could say something about how I also experienced that we become disconnected, though. Mm-hmm. So, Bill, you mentioned our trip in the fall. Our trip is not normally in the fall. It did become in the fall a couple of times around COVID, because we, you know the pain that COVID was. Typically, what we've done it right around the summer solstice, which is also sort of Father's Day, which maybe gives some of the guys an excuse to say, "Yeah, I'll be back in time for the nice dinner that you guys are going to make for me." We have this wonderful gathering right around the start of the summer, and usually the water's it's bracing, but it's warm enough to enjoy together and all that sort of thing, and we create this wonderful kind of community. It's usually around Easter time that I say, okay, guys, when the most people are at church around Easter, I'm going to put out that sign-up list, and y'all get your names on there. Then in June, we're out there. Well, everyone kind of takes some kind of a break in the summer. The church that I serve is closed for 1 month of the summer, and it alternates between July and August. When people get back together in September, they see one another in September and October. There was this dare I call it in a male group, a kind of intimacy that people are like, oh, geez, you're the guy that I helped out of that puddle. You're the guy that I gave this great big bear hug to, and now we haven't seen each other for a little while. That and then it's sort of reestablishing, hey, long time no see, and this kind of awkwardness that we can have, and maybe particularly in male relationships, is a little like that connection to nature that we sort of say, oh yeah, you. I liked you, and I let the world distract me from somewhat I think is the most important stuff in my life, the true north on my compass.
I think as we transition here, Ben, for the next Backroads Bill podcast with Ted and perhaps others. What I've learned today is, that question that why do we love nature? And I think given the quote, why do we love nature? And try to define that no matter where we are, who we are, because I don't think enough people have done that. So we can't protect anything until we answer that question. I often say to people, you can't do anything for the environment until you've helped yourself. And I think these are kind of parallel statements in a sense that we need to know about oneself and really where we are in our journeys, our spiritual journeys. I mean, that's your life. And so any last thoughts, and again, on this day during this holiday season, but any thoughts about, can you tell us something, can you give us something to think about with regards to going outside or nature on this day and days during this one celebratory part of the year? And again, all religions have them at different times of the year for different reasons.
Oh yes, and I'm a committed Christian and a generous. I have what I like to call, I learned from an author, a generous Christian orthodoxy, but we have so much to learn from one another. I do have something, and it's at all the ball games, there's these Christians, these kind of obnoxious Christians that hold up the sign John 3:16, God so loved the world that He gave us, that He came in Jesus. That's of course something that we're going to be thinking about at Christmas time. That God comes to us in Jesus. Why? Because God loves the world, and I think our job is to love the world. It may be imperfectly because we're trying to love like God, and that's a tall order. But we are called to love the world in a way that mirrors the love that we're going to be celebrating on the day that people get to hear us jabber on here, Bill.
I'm grateful that you've been in the studio today with Ben and myself.
We have one last thing to get to before we wrap up, though, and that is Sweetman's Garden, because we've talked about it a couple of times on the Echo Network. These been on Essentials. We haven't talked about it on this show, which is kind of funny because it is a nature thing. But there's an interesting connection between you and the garden. And you actually sent a message to Dave Dale, who's the co-host of Echo Essentials, about this interesting story. And I know Liz Lott, who was on that episode, she told this story. But just tell us a little bit about your connection to the garden. And you were, I believe, you were part of his Mr. Sweetman's funeral as well.
Yeah. So I've been living in North Bay since 2009, and I'm really not that far from Sweetman's Garden. And I'm inspired by him. So with the guidance, the advice that I don't always take of wonderful people like Donna and Jim Sinclair, I've been sort of doing my own sort of guerrilla garden in front of my house. And Murray Sweetman, he was an amazing man. He was a member of the church I serve. He's not the sort of guy that darkened the door a whole lot, I have to admit. And so when I saw Murray, it was me visiting Murray, not Murray visiting me. He did this amazing thing, right? That was a guerrilla garden. He was not supposed to be making that area as beautiful as he did, and he made it into this gorgeous Garden of Eden space. And I remember saying to him something like, there was this amazing water feature, and it's not in great shape now, but there was this amazing water feature in there, and he told me, I had to move the rocks to that, and I said, Murray, there's no way in this world that you could move all those rocks. And he said, I could move anything I set my mind to.
Did he have I never met him. Did he have a Southern accent, or was that a little flourish?
It wasn't Southern, but it was kind of growly. Okay. And he was known for smoking a lot of cigars. That might have contributed to that. So I presided at Murray's funeral, and that was a very well attended funeral because he was a kind of figurehead in our community, and in a sneaky way, right? It's not that he had a public office or that he had he wasn't remembered for what he got paid to do. He was remembered for his kind of defiant act of beauty. And so one of the stories that came out of that, I mean, there was quite a few, because there was stories about him in the press all over Canada, if not beyond. Was that Haile Selassie, the Emperor of Ethiopia, was doing a cross Canada trip by train, and that he, this would be a private train. Haile Selassie was a man of means, and he's also very esteemed by Rastafarians. Rastafarians held Haile Selassie in the same high esteem that Christians hold Jesus himself or some of the prophets. That Selassie, for some, was like kind of an incarnation, embodiment of God. And he asked for the train to stop. I can't attest to the truth of this story. I wasn't there. That the train would stop, and that he got out and walked Sweetman's Gardens, and that this would be a vision, of a holy man walking in that kind of paradise, Eden kind of beauty. And I find that tremendously moving. And if it isn't true, don't tell me.
And you also said he wore gloves as well. That's something you were saying off air.
Yeah. There's this story that is said amongst some Rastafarians that Haile Selassie wore gloves, and he did so because his hands bore the stigmata, the holes from the nails of Christ's crucifixion. I'm in no place to comment too much on that, but I have high esteem for Rastafarians, and the way they read the Bible is just is something incredible.
And it's always interesting, because we're so small, right? In the grand scheme of, everybody's small, but in the grand, even in terms of world view, we're just like this little place. Like, if you go down to Toronto and you go to a place like Armour or something, it's like 70,000 people or whatever, like small little hamlets. I don't know if they call them hamlets, but like little villages in the Toronto area, in the GTA, that have more people than North Bay, right? So like, to think about this guy who came all the way from like pretty much halfway across the world to specifically go to this one place that's literally down the street from where we're recording right now, and who's this like esteemed like religious figure. That's just like mind-boggling.
Well, the way they tell the story, it's like he's just sort of took a look out the window and said, "Oh, stop now."
Yeah.
I don't know if it could have worked out that way. But yeah,
the train did go right by there, and
it sure did.
And of course, I guess beauty is in the eyes of the beholder.
Absolutely.
Or beholders, and that's maybe a good way to think about our next Backroads Bill podcast.
Yep. And so, Ted, thank you so much for taking the time. I know we went a little long, but it was a pleasure having you on, and maybe we'll have you on again at some point for some reason. We'll find a reason to have you back on.
I would think so, for sure. Mm-hmm. There's more to explore.
Absolutely.
Real adventure. Happy trails, Bill.
Well, that was a very poignant and reflective episode today. So again, thank you for spending some of your holiday time with us here on the Backroads Bill podcast. Bill and I really appreciate all the support that you've shown us over the last year and a half, and we're looking into the new year, looking to have a strong year 2, year 3 of the podcast. We have some pretty cool guests already lined up for the new year, some returning guests that are going to come back on to give us a little bit of update on what they're doing and some of the new adventures they've been on. So you want to make sure to hit that subscribe or that follow button so you do not miss a single episode. And of course, if you enjoy our podcast, you can find us anywhere you get your podcasts. You can find the video version on the North Bay Echo YouTube channel, and new episodes come out every single Wednesday morning. And of course, that doesn't even stop for today. It's Christmas Day. It doesn't matter. We keep going. Same thing with New Year's. Doesn't matter if it's a holiday, whatever. You will find the Backroads Bill podcast every single Wednesday morning on your favorite podcast platform and on our website, NorthBayEcho.ca, which also has all of our other great local North Bay podcasts. It includes we also have our new and improved Echo Essentials newsletter. So that just launched a couple of weeks ago now, and that comes out once a week, same day as this podcast, every Wednesday at 11 a.m. It was nice before, but trust me, it's really nice now. Super fast to get through, super easy to read. You can really pick and choose the stuff that you want to interact with. It's very neat. So cool thing too is it's completely free, so you can sign up. It doesn't cost you a penny, which is always great. All you have to do is go to NorthBayEcho.ca and put in your email and it'll come to your inbox every single Wednesday at 11 a.m. So that does it again for us here at the Backroadsville podcast. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for spending your holiday season with us, and we'll be back next week as we head into the new year for another Backroads adventure.